So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Star versus the Forces of Evil, so let's start the series. It was within what looked like an old musty library when a burning portal appeared, from which numerous people hurried away. The first of them was Hekapoo, a demonic-looking woman with pale skin and a loose smile. She wore a ball gown that was orange and crimson, and between the two yellow horns that protruded from her red hair, there was a ball of fire. The other was Star Butterfly, a blonde girl with heart-shaped cheeks who was looking about the room with surprise and excitement. She looked like a walking rainbow because of the variety of colors in her attire. Marco Diaz, a Latin American lad in a red hoodie, was the next person out. He was likewise observing the area with curiosity but with a protective edge, as though something may suddenly emerge and attack them. He was followed by Tom, a sly teenage lad with a third eye on his forehead, tiny horns on either side of his head, and a somewhat purple complexion that made him look sickly. Not to be overlooked was Kelly, a dark-skinned girl with long aquamarine hair that was secured with a pink hair tie. She was wearing a shirt with pink and white stripes and was carrying a large broadsword like a toothpick. After the group had done surveying their surroundings, Star said, "So, this is the super amazing place you wanted to show us, Lady Hekapoo." With a playful theatrical tone, Hekapoo pointed to the endless rows of books and remarked, "Yep, welcome to the Dimensional Library, where you can find books from or about almost every dimension you can imagine. Though don't bother looking up your own since it'll only show it from your perspective." Marco approached the blazing redhead and remarked, "Really? Why's that H-poo?" He didn't even bat an eyelid when she slapped the back of his head, slightly singeing his hair. Hekapoo walked down an apparently random hallway with the rest of the group after saying, "Security and privacy reasons, now come on, I still have one last thing to show you guys." Star, Tom, and Kelly took a few books off the shelves and looked into them with interest as they strolled. Tom tossed his back with a drab expression, since it resembled a children's book about the exploits of a talking pickle superhero, while Star sighed contentedly, since hers was about a mermaid falling in love with a prince and being married. Kelly, on the other hand, dropped hers, her face matching her hair, the pages of her book filled with graphic pictures that would frighten even the most resilient stomach. Like I said, any story imaginable, so be careful what you read. Hekapoo looked at the greenette's response and smirked. As she flipped the book closed with her foot, Kelly gulped down the bile that was growing in her throat and said faintly, "I'll take that under advisement." Ignoring the slap he received for calling the woman H-poo, Marco replied, "So why did you bring us here, H-poo? Last I checked, you're not one to do something like this unless you have something to benefit from it." Hekapoo shrugged and said, "Meh, normally you would be right about that, but honestly I've just been bored out of my skull lately. There's been absolutely no incidents that require my attention for weeks now, so I've been coming here to pass the time and ended up finding something I think you guys would be interested in. Well, mostly you and Star, but since those two were with you already I figured might as well let them tag along." Tom cynically remarked, "Well, don't I feel real appreciated?" Kelly simply gave an uneasy smile. "So, could you tell us what it is you found exactly, or are we just gonna have to keep following you towards the devil only knows?" Hekapoo remarked, "Oh, relax you drama queen, we're already here." As they turned a corner, they saw a tiny theater-like space with a mini fridge, a large plain leather book on a podium, numerous comfortable chairs, and an outdated projection screen. "Say hello to the group reading area." Star sighed as she fell onto the plush cushioning of one of the chairs and uttered, "Oh, this place is nice. So comfy." Hekapoo proudly pulled the book off the stage, took a seat herself, and then turned to Marco, Tom, and Kelly. Of course they are, considering they cost 300 gold coins apiece. What are you dum-dums waiting for, an invitation? The three swiftly located a seat and settled up after taking the not-so-subtle suggestion. Tom sat down next to Star. Hecapua dropped the book she was clutching onto the boy's lap, who was wearing a sweatshirt, as Marco and Kelly took the couch next to her. Marco furrowed his eyebrows and read aloud, "Curiosity broke the scissors," by the curious Kitsune, before turning to face the fiery redhead. "Is this why you brought us here? To read a book together?" Hecapua pointed to the projection screen, which now displayed the same title that Marco had just read, and said, "Nope, you'll be reading, the rest of us will be watching." "I would ask, but it'd probably just give me a headache, wouldn't it?" "Yep." Marco turned to face his companions and said, "Whatever, you guys want to do this?" Kelly shrugged and replied, "Might as well, I don't have anything planned for today." Tom said, "If Starship is up for it, then so am I." "Mfgefgoich." Star said over a mouthful of popcorn that she had conjured up, her face beaming with excitement as she gazed expectantly at the television. Marco opened the book to the first page, the choice unanimous. Chapter 1. A brown-haired teen lad in a bright red sweatshirt murmured uneasily, "Star, I don't think this is a good idea." As she dropped the popcorn in her palms and gestured toward the TV, Star's eyes widened and she said, "Hey. That's Marco." Kelly and Tom shared her astonished look, but Marco simply showed mild surprise. The hooded lad looked at the flaming redhead, who shrugged and was idly drinking from a large glass mug she had taken out of a little portal. "So that's why you wanted us to read this?" "It's about us?" he questioned. "Pretty much, figured you guys would want in after I read the first chapter." Marco. "Read." Now, with impatience, Star exclaimed. As Hecapua laughed, Marco replied quite solemnly, "You weren't wrong. You heard Glossaric, locked dimensions are locked for a reason." "Locked dimensions?" Tom's eyebrows went up. The demonic kid nodded as Hecapua said, "It'll explain in a second." A blonde teen girl with red devil horn hairband and heart-marked cheeks exclaimed excitedly, "And that just makes me want to see them more, Marco." Her arms were flapping around, holding an elaborate pair of scissors clasped in each hand and a wand that resembled something you'd find in a magical girl anime. "Just imagine all the amazing things we'll get to see and awesome adventures we'll get to have." "That Star, okay." Kelly, Tom, and Marco all grinned the same way as the princess in question eagerly danced in her seat. "Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! It's actually me. This is so cool," Marco said to his companion, Star. "Calm down please," with a somewhat severe expression. "I can't read the story if you keep cutting me off every 5 seconds." His comments worked, as Star shook with barely controlled excitement and abruptly became still in her seat, her eyes fixed on the television. Marco hurried back to his book, realizing that he might had 2 minutes until the next inevitable eruption. These two were Star Butterfly, an active princess from another dimension who had been staying with Marco's family for the past few days as an exchange student while she learned to control the power of her wand, and Marco Diaz, a Latino-American boy who tended to be overly cautious and a bit of a neat freak. Marco encountered some of the most bizarre and peculiar circumstances of his life during that period. One notable instance was when Star's pal Pony Head, a real floating unicorn head, came to visit in order to have a final outburst before being transferred to a reform school. Reading those paragraphs caused Marco to smile, and he couldn't stop it. As he reminisced about his initial experiences with Star, he thought, man, it feels like so long ago since then. Since he had spent 16 years and 8 minutes chasing Hekapu across her personal dimension and several others she had dumped him into to acquire his own dimensional scissors, it was obviously a long time ago for him. Let's not debate semantics, though. Then the girl handed Star the scissors that could open gateways to other dimensions. No, really, and the bodiless horse left Star with them. Hekapu bowed her head, and Marco couldn't help but roll his eyes. Be honest with me, H-Poo, you chose to make dimensional scissors as actual scissors for laughs, didn't you? Marco said. As Hekapu laughed, one of her arms emerged from a portal behind Marco and struck the back of his head. Several hundred years and it's still funny as hell watching people's reactions when they see my beauties at work for the first time. In any case, Star, being the inquisitive and energetic young lady that she was, soon studied everything she could about the useful gadget and discovered locked dimensions, an intriguing connected topic. Almost all dimensional movement was prohibited in these dimensions, either as a result of a natural occurrence or as a deliberate closure due to the risks they posed. Tom remarked, "Ah, that makes sense," after being given the explanation. $5 says Starship's gonna try to go to one of those. Marco told his pal, "Oh please, Tom, we all know that's a sucker's bet," and sneered. 20 says her attempt ends in an explosion. I'll take that action. 30 says she succeeds with only a few minor issues. I'm with Marco, but I say that she summons a monster. Kelly said. Star sulked and remarked, "Come on guys, wasn't that bad." As he, Tom, and Kelly handed a few bills to Hekapu, who was suddenly dressed like a professional bookie, Marco shot back bluntly, making his friend pout. Star, the very first thing you did after we met was turn a butterfly into a monster that abducted a student and set half the school on fire. You were that bad. And, of course, Star wanted to visit one of these locations nearly as soon as she heard about them, even though everyone warned her that it was a very poor idea. Marco laughed and remarked, "You never were one to walk down the beaten path." Star gave him a sheepish smile. Marco sighed as Star twirled her wand in front of his face. "How do you even plan to do this? Everything you found on locked dimensions said that dimensional scissors don't work on them at all. Of course you're gonna use your wand." As they gave Hekapu more cash, Marco and Kelly simultaneously said, "Double my bet." The princess twirled the two magical objects in her hands idly and remarked, "Yep, if I channel the magic from it into the scissors, then it should boost them enough to work." Marco thought grimly, "Or it'll create a huge disastrous mess that we'll have to spend all day cleaning up, again." That was pretty much our routine for those first few weeks, wasn't it? Marco questioned cheekily, and Star, unable to refute his point, sighed once more while blushing slightly in embarrassment. He pointed to the neat bedroom they were standing in and said, "Okay, but why are we doing it in my room? I just finished cleaning in here." Star shrugged off the boy's worries as she held her arms out in front of her and pressed the top of the wand against the scissor blades while Marco ducked for cover. "Sorry Marco, but the laser puppies are napping in mine right now and I don't want to disturb them." "Now stop worrying so much, I'll be careful." Pouch, perfect. As Marco slowly emerged from his hiding place, he saw Star smiling and holding out the dimensional scissors, which now had a gentle pink glow. He was genuinely shocked to discover the room was entirely undamaged. As he got to his feet, the boy in the hoodie couldn't help but remark, "That was surprisingly anticlimactic." Marco, taken aback by the lack of spectacular outcomes, concurred with his partner, "Yeah, this is usually the part where everything goes crazy and I start fearing for my life. Looks like you're finally starting to get a hand on your magi dash. Star interrupted him by jabbing the scissors in front of her and snatching the air itself, resulting in a tiny incision. Okay, let's try these, she said. Crockexed. Marco shouted, I spoke too soon, as the room erupted in mayhem. There it is. Random parts of the room were abruptly iced over, strong winds blew around almost everything that wasn't nailed to the floor, and lightning arced around, setting some things on fire and leaving dark scorch marks. Hecapus stated gravely, unstable dimensional rifts, never a pretty sight. Marco nodded in agreement. Both had seen their share of these, the latter throughout his 16-year search for the former and the former since it was her responsibility to deal with such issues. The hooded boy smiled nostalgically and said, remember that one that engulfed an entire mountain range in the quasi-swamp dimension? Yeah, you took out 6 of my clones at once while they were distracted by it, good times. In the midst of all of this, Star resolutely refused to back down as she fought to keep cutting. The doorway expanded with each cut of the scissors, but the devastation surrounding her grew worse and worse. The two began to perspire heavily as the room's temperature soared, melting all the ice, and then fell just as quickly. Then, as the tear grew, hot, steaming water began to stream out, drenching the floor and making the ice that was forming snap and hiss from the unexpected warmth. As they saw the many risks magically avoid Star even though they were at point-blank range, Kelly said bewilderedly, how is she not getting hurt by all that? Before stopping to take a long swig of her drink, Hecapus said, protection charms. They activate automatically for whoever's wielding the scissors while they are being used, just in case something like this happens, and will prevent most forms of harm. I may be a lax and laid-back kinda gal, but I put the whole 9 yards into each pair of scissors I make. Marco, holding to his bed frame for dear life as his body was yanked around in the air like a rag doll, shouted, why you need T to SS stop Star, with chattering teeth. This eye is getting T2F far out of hand. With a worrisome expression on the faces of the boy, Kelly, and Tom, Hecapus added, unfortunately, other Marco doesn't have any of that protection whatsoever. Star was worried too, but she also had a guilty look on her face as she saw her friend's counterpart struggle to stay alive. Am I truly that careless? Normally, she wouldn't give much thought to the danger she and Marco were in, primarily due to the adrenaline and thrill she was experiencing at the time. But now that she was examining the consequences of her other's behavior from a distance, it was forcing her to think back on all the antics she and her closest friend had engaged in since they first met. Because of his karate training and 16 years of battle experience, Marco was able to take care of himself rather well, yet even in those cases, they barely survived most of their adventures. With a scowl that soon transformed into a smile as her cheek marks became light bulbs, Star thought, well, I know. I'll get him that new collar he'd been wanting for nachos. I should probably get Marco an apology gift for all of that, she said. A little bit more time. It's nearly done. The princess gritted her teeth and dropped her wand so that she could grasp the cutting tool's handles with both hands and squeeze them with all her strength. Star yelled back, the hearts on her cheeks now turned to tick marks as she attempted to make the final cut, but the scissors would not budge. With sage advice, Kelly stated, it's always that last step that makes you really work for it. Everyone nodded in accord. Star, a bolt just missed, turning the hooded youngster into an extra-fried teenager, and he shouted. Marco, hold on. Star's hands trembled violently and sweat practically showered from her brow, but a wide grin spread across her lips once she started to feel the scissors close. "I'm almost there." The magic paper cutter ultimately cut through the fabric of reality with a final grunt of effort, and the portal stabilized, transforming into a vortex that resembled a black hole and spun idly in the air. "Hey! I seem to have one," Tom shouted as he extended his hand to Hekapu, but she merely waved her finger with a knowing smile rather than giving him the cash. The demonic prince sighed and scuttled back into his seat when the burning redhead whispered, "Not so fast, Hellboy Jr., give it one more paragraph." Yes. It was successful. It was successful. As things calmed down, Star joyfully yelled, "I told you it would work, Marco." "Come on, I'm eager to," crackle. The blonde girl paused in the middle of her statement when she heard a strange cracking sound, followed the sound to its origin, and stared in disbelief as shimmering fractures quickly spread across the blades of the dimensional scissors she was holding. The flame on top of her head was slightly redder than usual, her eyes narrowed slightly, the left one twitched almost imperceptibly, and she kept tapping the middle finger of her free hand against her armrest, leaving a small scorch mark. To most people, Hekapu would appear calm, but Marco's eyes flickered towards her uncomfortably, and he could tell she was quite upset. Naturally, it was also very obvious that her drink had evaporated and that the cup in which it had been contained was quickly becoming a blob of molten glass in her hand. The color quickly drained from Star's face, and her cheek marks became warning signals as similar cracks developed across her face as well. She snapped her focus back to the gateway in front of her, and as she realized what was about to happen, she turned to Marco and extended her hand towards him. Then everything turned white. Even though they knew this wasn't Star, it was nevertheless nerve-wracking to watch her doppelganger in such peril, and Star, Kelly, and Tom were on the edge of their seats as they gazed expectantly at the screen with anxious and tense expressions on their faces. Marco moaned weakly as his surroundings gradually came into focus and he numbly took in the sight of his bedroom being destroyed from the floor he was lying on. However, as his brain quickly returned to normal, his shock quickly transformed into concern for his friend when he went to where she had been and saw nothing but shards of broken metal lying on the floor. Star. Hekapu silently placed the cash on Marco's lap, but Marco was too preoccupied with the book he was reading to notice. The youngster began to cough violently and struggled to sit up, only to be trapped beneath the charred remnants of his bed from the shoulders down. He was not at all discouraged and wriggled as much as he could to try to escape. Marco grumbled softly and acknowledged, "Yeah, not gonna happen." His bed frame was made of solid oak, and in his current state, his other wouldn't be able to move it. A swirling circle of fire appeared right at the epicenter of the explosion, and after a few minutes of futile struggling, Marco froze. Thinking that another blast was imminent, the hooded teenager braced himself as best he could, but was again taken by surprise when a beautiful woman with pale skin, long red hair, and two horns sticking out of her head, wearing an orange ball gown and a black tiara with a small flame floating above it, stepped out. With a hint of irritation in her tone, Hekapu joked, "I've always known how to make an entrance." With a frown on her face, she leaned down and picked up a few of the scissor shards with her palm as she surveyed the majority of the ruined bedroom, her mask of neutrality only breaking when she noticed the metal fragments on the floor. As the fire above her head flared, the demonic-looking woman straightened back up and glared at the shards for a few moments before abruptly jerking her head to the side, facing Marco with a fierce glare. "Tell me, boy, who's the dumbass that fucked with things they shouldn't have?" As Star, Kelly, and Tom's astonished faces shifted from the on-screen Hekapu to their own, that statement actually succeeded in jolting them out of their preoccupation. "What?" After this continued for a full minute, the dimensional travel enforcer arched an eyebrow and questioned. Kelly, the first to recover from her amazement, stated, "I'm sorry, it's just hard to imagine you of all people swearing or looking so angry. You're always just so chill. As I previously stated, I work really hard to create each pair of scissors I make, making each pair by hand for a particular client." The princess swallowed anxiously and then ducked behind her best friend for protection. "Let's see you be chill after seeing something you worked so hard on be destroyed because a foolish princess got too curious for her own good," Hekapus stated sourly. "Marco, please keep reading." In the meantime, a boy with spiky blonde hair and 3 whisker-like marks on each cheek sank into the warm, soothing water of a hot spring, wearing nothing but a towel around his waist, and murmured, "Ah, this is just what I needed after all those stupid D-ranks. What the devil? Who is this man?" As the screen shifted to an entirely new, unidentified person, Tom demanded. "Maybe someone from the dimension Star was trying to go to," Kelly said, blushing slightly at the sight of a boy who was largely nude, with water covering the crucial parts. "It'll probably explain it soon, so just try to be patient." This was Jinchuriki of the Kyubi no Kitsune and Naruto Uzumaki, the most popular hyperactive knucklehead ninja in the town of Konohagakure. With a raised eyebrow, Marco wondered what the book meant by "power of human sacrifice." He knew a little bit of Japanese from some extra credit classes he had taken. "He's a ninja, huh? The mutant turtles in the cartoon you showed me, for example." Marco was startled out of his reverie by Star's enthusiastic question and the chuckle that came out of his mouth. Marco calmed the girl down by saying, "Maybe Star, but it is a different dimension, so ninja might mean something else for them." He and his crew had just completed a number of D-rank missions, which are essentially lazy civilian tasks, and he was now relaxing in one of Konoha's hot spring spas. But after a few minutes of stillness, the lad looked about the deserted spring and let out a bored sigh, saying, "Man, I can't believe they all bailed on me." As part of a small celebration of graduating from the academy, he was supposed to be hanging out with his male friends Shikamaru, Choji, Shino, and Kiba, as well as their sensei Kakashi and Asuma, to talk about how their first week as official ninja had been going. That sounds like a lot of fun. Why wouldn't his pals come? Unable to comprehend such a thing, Star inquired with a titled head. Tom reassured, "I'm sure they had good reasons." Sadly, Choji ended up attending an eating contest instead, with Asuma and Shikamaru accompanying him to ensure he didn't travel too far, and, in the case of the latter, to likely take a sleep. The quiet child spent the next several days on bed rest after Shino's hive contracted the bug equivalent of the common cold. Even his teammate Sasuke was absent, but that was to be expected since the emo had nothing to do with anything other than training, brooding, or tomatoes. Kiba was at home recovering his pride and face from the beating he received when he made a crude joke about his sister without realizing she was right behind him. It was enough to say that Kakashi was just too lazy to come. In an odd way, Tom corrected himself, scratch that, some of them had good reasons. Does this novel provide the impression that we should already be familiar with these guys, or is that just me? Everyone turned to look at Kelly as she asked the question. Marco reviewed the paragraph once more and added, "Yeah, actually, they did just list them off without giving much context to them." Hekapua then reached over and turned the page all the way to the end of the book. She stopped at 2 pages that contained Marco and Star's photos along with some basic information like personality type, immediate relatives, affiliations, and a brief synopsis. That's because all the character information is at the back of the book, see. Marco began to read them, but was interrupted again when the fiery redhead flipped the pages back to their original position, saying, "Ah, thanks Hekapu." Before returning to her seat with a fresh mug, she said, "You can indulge your curiosity when the chapter's over, now get back to reading." It wasn't easy, though, as the splashing and shouting coming over the divider from the women's side kept reminding Naruto that he wasn't getting to hang out with his friends as planned. But he wasn't going to let that stop him from trying to have fun and letting the mineral-rich hot water soak away the stress and soreness in his muscles because he didn't want to waste the money he spent to be here. "Oh." Tom and Marco hissed empathetically and discussed applying salt to the wound. With another groan, he sent a jealous glance to the dividing wall before lowering himself deeper into the water, somehow oblivious to the pale purple eye that was peering at him through a tiny hole. "Oh, who am I kidding, this blows." The owner of said eye, Hinata Hyuga, a quiet, kind girl who belonged to the highly esteemed Hyuga clan, thought with a sad expression, "Poor Naruto-kun." She was a pretty young girl with short dark blue hair. When Hinata's mostly nude form appeared on screen, with only water and a towel barely covering her developed chest to protect her modesty, Tom and Marco both flushed, while Kelly's expression changed to one of jealousy as she glanced from the brunette's already well-developed chest to her own. "She seems nice," Star remarked, unfazed by Hinata's lack of clothing while Hekapu snapped pictures of the former three's reactions. The brunette paused her PPP'er for a moment to check on Naruto after hearing more shouting coming from behind her. She turned to see a girl with platinum blonde hair and another with pink hair shouting at each other while a woman with red eyes and raven hair held them apart with a drab expression. "My Ino pig is Sasuke-kun." "No way, forehead. He adores me. He really does." "Gosh, do people really behave that way?" When Kelly saw the two girls fighting over a boy's love, she asked incredulously, "I thought that was just some stupid TV trope. You should watch the school cheerleaders every time a new, attractive jock appears since you believe that's horrible." As he and Star trembled, recalling the moment the all-out catfight had started, Marco remarked, "The last time ended with 3 of them in the hospital." These 3, in order, were Kurenai, Hinata's team sensei, Sakura, Naruto's teammate and crush, and Ino, Sakura's ex-friend and love rival. Hinata couldn't help but roll her eyes at the scene and return to surreptitiously spying on a bored Naruto. "Ahem, and what do you think you're doing? EEP." Or at least she believed she had been tactful. The rest of the gang laughed a little as Hekapu stated, in a sing-song voice, "Somebody's busted dot." Hinata jumped in surprise at the voice directly behind her, spun around with a noticeable flush, and then flinched as Sakura gave her a suspicious look. Kurenai gave her a strange look of amusement and disappointment, and Ino grinned with a sparkle in her eye. "Aren't you attempting to spy on Sasuke-kun?" Sakura stabbed a finger into the pale-eyed girl's growing chest and blamed her. Kelly replied, "One track mind that one," with a dully tone. While pushing the pinkette aside and embracing Hinata with one arm, Ino said, "Oh please forehead, everyone knows she has a huge crush on Naruto." But who knew little Miss Wallflower Hinata had it in her to try peeping on him? Ino asked. "After all, I suppose the adage about the silent ones is accurate. What is said about those who are quiet?" Star asked innocently, causing Tom, Kelly, and Marco to blush deeply while Hekapu broke out into laughter. After a long awkward silence, Marco said, We'll tell you later." Hinata's face was now actually blazing red, and as she attempted to deny everything, steam began to gently rise from her ears. However, her words came out in a stuttering, confused mess. Sakura arched an eyebrow and questioned, really? She's actually into Naruto Baka, she said. I thought that was just one of those stupid rumors you started up for fun. Tom's brows were furrowed as he asked, what's Baka mean? It sounds like an insult to me. The demonic youngster frowned as Marco remarked, it is. Baka has several translations, but the most common are idiot, moron, and retard. Ino's chest swelled with pride as she exclaimed, hey! I'll have you know that I only deal with authentic gossip. As she eagerly took the girl's place at the hole, Ino smirked and drew Hinata away. Speaking of which, I wonder what the boys are talking about, or how Sasuke looks without his shirt. Hekapus snickered and remarked, boy is she in for a disappointing surprise. When she noticed Naruto alone, idly splashing water at a nearby rock, her excitement abruptly turned to bewilderment in precisely 0.01 seconds. What the? Naruto's the only one over there. Sakura squeezed up beside the blonde and blinked in shock when she noticed the same thing. Say what? She asked. The heck? Where is everyone? Before she and Sakura moved to the changing room, Ino remarked, they're probably still getting undressed. They were expecting to spot Sasuke as he left. K sound effect, fast forward. As the sound effect played and the screen displayed 30 seconds of Naruto moving quickly and boredly, Marco mumbled, where is that coming from? I actually don't know. Hekapus shrugged and said. After 5 minutes with no sign of anyone approaching, Ino stepped away from the wall and stated, okay, they aren't here. Maybe something came up. For everyone but Naruto? Sakura questioned incredulously. They probably just decided to bail at the last minute. Unfortunately, that's pretty much what happened. Everyone in the group frowned, with the exception of Hekapus. Shino and Kiba were the only ones with valid reasons for not attending, everyone else essentially found something else to do besides visit the hot spring. The frowning Ino responded, yeah, that sounds like something they'd do. I kinda feel bad for Naruto though, I heard he was really looking forward to this. Sakura sank back into the scalding water, oblivious to Hinata's brief angry glance before the bashful girl returned to checking on Naruto. Meh, he'll be fine, just buy him some ramen and the idiot will forget all about it. Kelly said, not appreciating the girl's contempt for the boy's feelings, man, if she was any colder then that water would be melting her. Kurenai gave the pinkette a frown and remarked cynically, amazing, such concern for your teammates' well-being, it's inspiring. Marco, Star, and Kelly all nodded in agreement as Tom remarked, she's his teammate. Wow, now I'm really starting to feel bad for the guy. That did sound sorta cold, Sakura, even if this is Naruto we're talking about. Ino had to acknowledge this. Sakura responded with a shrug, her expression remaining unchanged. Maybe a little, but I'm not wrong. I've yet to see something that keeps him down for long. Since it seemed to imply that the Sakura girl was accustomed to witnessing her friend in mental anguish, Kelly commented, that comment is not assuring in the least. Knowing what Sakura was talking about, Ino nodded, and Kurenai rolled her eyes before turning to face Hinata, who gave her a gentle arm shake. What is it, Hinata? As she abruptly dragged the woman with the raven hair to the spying location, the blonde stammered, there's something weird happening with NN and Naruto-kun. Kurenai was taken aback by the girl's behavior and didn't recover until she was peering through the wall hole and observed what Hinata was discussing. Even though he was puzzled and tense, Naruto was fine. The reason for this was that the water surrounding him was swirling wildly and emitting a vivid aurora of colors. Marco joked, Well, either someone turned up the heat, or that star about to make her grand debut. The princess laughed and punched his arm in jest. Kurenai's eyes furrowed at the sight, then widened as the light began to increase fast, and she whispered, "What the hell?" She screamed, "Get down," and grabbed Hinata before throwing the other two girls into the spring. Boom! Gah! Ack! What the heck? My ears! The sound of an explosion actually echoed through the air, and everyone except Hekapu let out a startled cry. The woman who looked like a devil smiled cheekily as she removed the earplugs she had just pushed into her ears. As she observed the other members of the group massaging their ears and complaining about the unexpected noise, she thought, just as funny as I expected. A huge explosion rocked the region, destroying the hot springs barriers and causing hot water to spray everywhere. Sakura, Ino, and Hinata exploded to the surface as the blast's effect subsided, gasping for air, while Kurenai just got to their feet, blood streaming from every ear. Sakura shouted out, What was that?" once she had finished coughing up the water she had inadvertently fallen into. Unable to hear what the pinkette was saying, Ino shouted out, "What?" While feigning to stroke a beard she didn't have, Hekapu correctly remarked, "And that's why you don't jump in the water when there's an explosion, kids, it'll just make it much worse for you." As phantom pain shot through his ear, Marco grimaced and thought, "I learned that the hard way." He had dove into a lake to escape an explosive spell she had thrown at him during the second year of his Hekapu hunt. 6 months of continuous ringing in both ears due to a blown-out eardrum ensured that he would never make the same mistake twice. Neither Hinata nor Kurenai spoke, the former was too stunned to do so, while the latter realized that there was no need in trying because she knew that the agony in her inner ears and the confusion she experienced were due to ruptured eardrums. In addition to that, they were both astounded by what they saw when they turned to face the explosion's source. Naruto remained seated in the same position, his expression a mask of surprise and disbelief. His towel was just a stack of tatters, and he had several small heat and scald burns all over his body, but he was strangely unhurt. Since they could both barely make out Naruto's, little Naruto, poking out from behind the partly destroyed towel, Kelly's cheeks heated up at the sight of the mostly new teenager once more. This time, Star joined her. But even though he was unhurt, he stayed motionless and kept his eyes fixed forward. While Star, looking similarly astonished, glanced back at her fellow blonde with her arm extended. "Hi. Yo." As the words, "End of Chapter 1, flooded the screen, Hekapu rhetorically said, "Well guys, what do you think?" A certain princess jumped excitedly in her seat as the group returned to their seats after taking a quick break to grab some snacks and drinks for themselves. Star said, "Come on Marco, keep reading. I want to know what happens next," which caused the Latino lad to turn the page and sigh in frustration. All right, hold your warnicorn, Star. Recently. Hi. Yo. Hekapu joked, couldn't have summed it up better myself. And now, Star was anxious, the most anxious she had ever felt in her life. She was seated in a chilly metal chair in a little space that was nearly entirely composed of drab gray stone, save for the solid metal door on one side. She was unable to move her fingers since her hands were restrained to each side of the table in front of her and were wearing strange gloves. She felt weak and lethargic as a result of the strange scrap of paper with the characters meaning, "suppress," on her forehead. As Star's current state was displayed on the projector, Kelly said, "Wow, isn't that a little overkill?" Hekapu said plainly, "We imprison people in crystal prisons for years, most of the time without even giving them a proper trial. Star shuddered as she recalled the moment when Romulus froze her. With trepidation, Kelly mumbled, "I retract my previous statement." The girl had been at the hot spring for a few hours now, and she was growing more and more concerned about her own health. She had been arrested shortly after her appearance by a group of frightful individuals in animal masks while she was still getting over the shock of the explosion and the sight of a boy her age who was largely nude. Reminding them of that small detail caused Kelly and Star to flush a little, which was exacerbated when Hecapo's arm appeared in front of them through a portal holding a photograph of the scene. Eep! Marco sighed in frustration and grabbed something from behind him. A spray bottle. The demon woman recoiled somewhat when he pointed it at Hecapo and pressed the trigger a few times, launching a few jets of water into her face. Bad poo, no excessive teasing. Hecapo complained as she dragged her hand back through the portal and then stuck it through another one and swatted the back of his head, briefly setting his hair on fire before he extinguished it while holding the spray bottle. Fine, spoilsport. She had been detained in this room ever since, being repeatedly questioned by various individuals. The first had been Ibiki, a scarred man with a bandana over his head who had questioned the princess about her identity and the reason she was in Konoha. As Ibiki's face appeared on screen with his usual bland intimidation expression, Tom said with a shudder, "Man, I feel like that guy could freeze water just by staring at it." Despite her fear that he wouldn't believe her, Star told him the whole tale because she was an honest girl and because of the man's scary atmosphere. Although she didn't have her wand to support her claims at the time, she could clearly recall Marco's response when she first displayed her magic. With an anxious giggle, Star remarked, "Oh yeah, that could be problematic." "No kidding, unless your other is ridiculously lucky, then she's probably gonna be tossed into a loony bin." Kelly replied simply. But no matter how unbelievable her remark seemed, the man's expression remained unflinching. Ibiki praised her for her cooperation and excused himself after she was done. A lively woman with light purple hair waltzed in a few minutes later and introduced herself as Anko. She appeared to be a kind person, always cracking jokes and even giving Star some delicious dango, for which the girl was quite grateful because she was starving, before asking her some of the same questions Ibiki did. Star smiled as she remarked, "Well, she's a pretty nice person." Marco blushed at Anko's skimpy attire and said, "Yeah, but isn't she a little bit underdressed?" His face grew crimson pink as he read the next sentence. She did, however, also include a number of questions that seemed arbitrary and private, such as her favorite color, if she thought the boy at the hot springs was cute, her home life, whether she had ever kissed a male, her hobbies, and whether she had ever seen a boy's junk. Hecapo turned to face Star with a broad smile after laughing loudly at the sight of everyone's flushed faces. "Bwahahaha. Oh man, this is priceless," she said. "So Star, have you ever seen a boy's junk before?" As her voice cracked and her heart markings blazed brilliant pink, Star stutteringly shouted, "WWA? No. Oh, of course and not." Hecapo laughed even harder, unconcerned as Marco sprayed her repeatedly. Strangely enough, Star felt the answers nearly spill out of her tongue before she could even think about them, despite her best efforts to avoid answering most, of those questions. As he recovered from his embarrassment, Tom remarked, "Well, you were never one to keep a secret, were you, Starship?" By the time Anko departed, Star's cheeks were actually burning a bright pink, and her face was as red as a tomato. Staring from the real Star to the one on screen, Hecapo thought, "Oh man, it's like staring in a mirror." She gave a final chuckle. The princess of Muni blacked out as the last person to see her became a middle-aged blonde man who just spoke his name, Inoichi, and then made a series of amusing hand gestures. The man was walking away when she arrived, and her head was aching somewhat. Hekapu and the rest of the gang nodded in agreement as Marco said, okay, I do not like the sound of that at all. Me either, Hekapu remarked, but on the plus side, it would appear that the people of that world have some form of magic, so Star's chances of not appearing insane just went up. Hekapu was already sensing what had happened. Star muttered softly, I guess that's a plus, and gestured to the man's headband. I wonder why they all wear that. Do you think it's some kind of fashion statement? Having witnessed comparable techniques in other dimensions, Hekapu stated, Nah, I'd say it's more likely a kind of identification badge, likely to separate the warriors from civilians. And now here she was, alone, trapped in an unidentified dimension without her wand or a means of escape, and being kept captive by equally unidentified individuals. Even though she was always full of hope, Star was finding it difficult to maintain her optimistic attitude as time passed. As the only light in the room flickered menacingly, she thought quietly, I should have listened to Marco. Star gave her buddy an offended look, but Marco pulled her out of her discomfort and added, You really should, a lot of our problems would have been so much easier to deal with if you did. Hey! I'm not that bad. The Latino lad said, Star, this whole story is based on the fact you are that bad. The princess of Muni paused for a few seconds before returning to her seat with a disappointed sigh. The princess was unaware that she was not as alone as she believed, as 4 individuals were standing on the opposite side of the wall she was facing. The wall appeared transparent to them. Marco nodded in agreement as Star remarked, Cool, it's like that one-way mirror from that TV show you showed me, Order of Law. The first 3 were the individuals who had been questioning Star, and the 4th was an old man in traditional clothing, wearing red highlighted robes, who had just completed going over a number of documents. This was the 3rd Hokage of Konoha, Hiruzen Sarutobi, a famous political and shinobi skills genius. As they all examined the elderly leader, Kelly remarked, he seems nice, kind of grandfatherly. You're certain that she isn't a spy or assassin? As Marco and the rest of the party, excluding Hekapu because her complexion was already completely white, went pale, he mumbled, Oh crap, this could be so much worse than we thought. Ibiki answered, Positive Hokage-sama, without hesitation. The girl definitely shows signs of fighting skill, but she is no ninja. Her story also stayed completely consistent throughout both mine and Anko's talks with her. Unable to contain her laughter, Anko continued, Yeah, the little gawky didn't even notice the truth serum that was laced her dango with given her. Her reactions to the test questions were priceless. Wait, she drugged me? Star's brows narrowed. I figured as much, Hekapu stated coolly as she took a sip from her cup. They pulled a classic scare and care. The first guy frightens the crap out of you to test your resolve, then the next one acts all friendly so's to trick you into lowering your guard. Inoichi held out a pair of crimson scissor handles and said, She checks outs mentally as well, her memories show none of the fragmentation or degradation that they would from someone suffering from delusions or hallucinations. Star gripped her head and mumbled feebly, I feel violated. The notion that someone had entered her head and observed all of her memories and thoughts was extremely unsettling, even though it wasn't her. That intrusive feeling persisted despite the consoling words of Tom, Kelly, and Marco. The scientists did confirm that these had been emitting an odd energy. From what they could tell, it definitely wasn't chakra, but it dispersed before they could get a proper sample, most likely because they're broken. So they don't think you're a spy or crazy, that's good. Marco added, sharing Star's feeble smile. Inoichi lowered the scissor handles and held up Star's wand as the elderly man said, "What about the other item?" Fortunately, it was still whole, unlike the scissors, but the miraculous instrument had obviously seen better days because it was covered with cracks and scorch scars. Until Marco read the paragraph after that. As Kelly and Tom winced at the sight of the broken magical relic, Hekapu remarked, "So not only was she in prison, but the people holding her were in possession of the royal family wand. That will probably not end well." As Star sank in her seat, her cheek marks morphing into crying emojis, she thought in dread, "Oh man, I'm doomed, I am so very doomed." Marco was a little concerned to see someone other than Star holding the magic relic, but he wasn't particularly alarmed by the damaged wand because he had already saw it entirely destroyed twice. "Wow, we are really getting into this story," he thought as he observed his companion's responses. The blonde put both objects in the elderly man's hand and added, "It's also giving off some form of energy and even seems to still be operational, but we haven't been able to get any form of reaction from it or the samples we took so far." "Wait, what?" the entire group exclaimed, startled by this passage. Star looked down at her own wand, a sleeker and more realistic replica of the one on TV, and queried, "No reaction. But how? Anyone should be able to use the wand if they try, shouldn't they? Well, me and Lobster Claws were able to, and Ludo used a piece of it, so yeah, I don't see why none of them can't get it to work." Marco replied with a smirk. "Maybe it's broken from the explosion as well." Hekapush shook her head and remarked, "Not likely, otherwise it would have stopped giving off magical energy like the scissors." Marco hurriedly turned back to the book he was holding, but not before saying, "Plus, now we don't have to worry about them abusing the wand's power." "Good point, guess we'll just have to keep reading then to find out." The elderly man nodded his head in comprehension and looked thoughtfully through the one-way wall at Star as she progressively became more anxious by the moment. He seems content with what he observed and left after a few minutes of silence. Star gave a little start when the door opened again and an old guy entered, grinning kindly. "Hello Star-san, sorry for startling you." "San." Star said again, perplexed by the suffix that had been added to her name. Marco told the princess, it's a Japanese term which is basically their version of Mr., MS, and Mrs. "Oh, thanks Marco." She said courteously, but a little anxious and a little frustrated, "Hello sir, are you here to ask me more questions?" "A few yes, but first," Hiruzen said, shocking the girl by reaching forward as he sat down and removing the paper on her head and gloves before releasing the cuffs that were fastened around her wrists. "I apologize for all the discomfort my people had to put you through, but with your interesting arrival we had to be sure you weren't here to cause any trouble." "I'm sure you can understand." Tom grinned and said, "Would you look at that starship, looks like he's gonna let you go after all." The others were clearly at ease with the seemingly positive news. "Yes sir," Star nodded while massaging her aching wrists. "Does this mean you're letting me go?" "Well yes and no," Star winced as she added, "or not," understanding just enough political jargon to understand what, well yes and no meant. According to her father, it was a concise way of stating, yes, but there's a big catch that will basically make it a no anyway. Hiruzen said, receiving a perplexed glance before he continued. "While it may have been an accident, you did do a considerable amount of property damage and had a few people sent to the hospital." Star slid deeper into her seat in defeat, cringing again as if to collapse. "Right," totally forgot about that part. The old guy held up his hand, interrupting Star as he gulped and began to apologize. Relax, it was only a few burns and ruptured eardrums. However, you will have to pay the costs for repairs, loss of business, and hospital bills. Star, already dreading the response, questioned, and how much will that be? Since her parents are royalty and all, money shouldn't be a problem for her. However, she was unable to get in touch with them at the moment, and she was certain that they would reject an IOU. Marco cocked an eyebrow and said, "So that's how we avoided getting in trouble whenever we caused mass amounts of property damage." Star nodded her head and smiled sheepishly. "Yeah. I didn't even know that they did that until shortly after I moved back into the castle. I stumbled into the accounting chamber by accident while they were going over the total cost of my stay," she said as she rubbed her head. For the umpteenth time that day, Marco looked dully at his companion and sighed in frustration. "I know I'm going to regret asking this, but exactly how much debt are you, and most likely me as well, in with your parents right now?" "Well." Star waved her wand sheepishly and a manila folder materialized in front of Marco. "That's the current tab so far." The Latino youngster, who was a little pale due to the size of the file, carefully took it up and opened it to the final page, which displayed the current amount, before quickly snapping it back shut with a blank look on his face. "Star, we are so going to have a long talk about this when we get back." When Marco flashed the amount for Tom to view, he interrupted his statement and shouted, "Oh come on Marco, it can't be," and I'm shutting up. His eyes were bugging out. Hiruzen remarked, "Roughly 720,000 Rio, $72,000, which made Star quickly turn pale at the sheer volume. "And judging by what you've told us, you don't exactly have that kind of money on hand." Kelly remarked, For those of us who aren't from Earth or haven't been there for very long, how bad is that?" But she could tell by the frightened expressions on Star and Marco's faces that it was really bad. With a low whistle from the greenette, Star said, "You could buy a dozen cartloads of goblin dogs and not even be halfway there." The princess dropped into her chair and replied regretfully, "No sir, I don't." Hiruzen held out Star's wand and said, "Well then, that does leave you in a bit of a pickle, but I'm sure we can come up with a reasonable solution. Does this look familiar?" The girl's eyes widened in surprise. "My wand," cried Star, startled. "How did you get that? What happened to it?" Star winced as Hiruzen remarked, "One of my men found it like that floating inside the hot spring. The damage is most likely being from the explosion you caused. You claim to be able to cast magic with this, correct?" "Oh boy," Marco thought anxiously, "I think I know where this is going." Star laughed awkwardly as she recalled all the mistakes she had made when casting new spells and said, "Yeah, I can do all sorts of cool spells with it, although I am still learning how to use it properly." "Those were some crazy times all right," Marco murmured, nudging Star's side with a smile of nostalgia. "Remember when you accidentally turned our math teacher into a troll?" Star laughed a little as she recalled that specific mishap and remarked, "He yeah, I wonder how Miss Skolnick is doing." The old man held the wand out to her and said, "Okay then, would you mind giving me a small example?" Kelly arched an eyebrow and said, "Weird, why would he just give you the wand back like that?" Star brightened a little and said hopeful, "Maybe he's giving me the benefit of the doubt." Star swiftly snatched it from his grasp and examined the magic tool carefully, letting out a sigh of relief when she realized the damage wasn't as severe as it appeared, before aiming it at the table. "Blooming daisy sparkles. Very intriguing, Hiruzen thought as dozens of glitter-covered flowers appeared out of nowhere on the metal table. Well then, Butterfly-san, I do believe I have just the way for you to pay off your debt. Everyone save Hekapu gave Marco strange looks when he moaned, "Aw crap, I knew it." Kelly's eyebrows went up as she said, "What's wrong, Marco?" Before he resumed reading, the Latino lad assured the greenette, "You'll see in a moment if I'm right." Time skip. With a cup of freshly made instant ramen in hand, Naruto sat down in a chair near a plain wooden table and moaned, "Kami, I hate hospitals." Star's second question was aimed at Marco, "What's ramen?" It's a noodle dish from Japan. The instant version is quick and easy to make but not very good for you nutrition-wise. Marco clarified. He was wearing his typical outfit, which consisted of a bright orange jacket and blue highlighted pants with a fluffy white collar. Them and their stupid needles. He had been brought to the hospital to be examined following that strange episode at the hot springs. But because of his innate ability to heal, the blonde's wounds were virtually healed by the time he arrived. Marco looked shocked and remarked, "Wow, that sounds like a watered-down version of Toffee's healing." Regretfully, it was discovered that he needed multiple doses and was past time for multiple inoculations. Star shivered as she recalled the time she had to visit the hospital on Earth to have a vaccination in order to continue attending Marco's school. Ugh, those are the worst. She was human, but fortunately, her immune system was so similar to a human's that the only negative side effect of the shots was that she got a real cold from the flu shot. The nurse was kind enough to give him a coupon for 2 at Ichiraku's, his favorite food stall, following the procedure. However, for some reason, Sakura called him a baka and smacked him severely when he attempted to check on her. When Kelly heard that, she frowned and muttered, "Wow, talk about rude." Star tilted her head in perplexity and questioned, "Why would she do that?" He probably just caught her in a bad mood. That kinda happens after you've been in an explosion. Hekapu replied. Clock clock clock. When Naruto heard a loud pounding on the front door, he paused in the middle of slurping down his supper, his head moving toward it. "Fo the hef is fat." Tom responded, "Probably Starship." The others nodded in agreement. Only the Hokage and Irika, his former academy teacher and big brother figure, stopped by his house, and they both knew they didn't have to knock before going inside. Hekapu gave the child a fleeting sympathetic glance and remarked cynically, "Well, that wasn't depressing at all." It was somewhat depressing to be so accustomed to being alone that a knock on the door was an uncommon occurrence. Star frowned as she remarked, "Why doesn't anyone visit him? He seems like such a nice guy." Marco proposed, prompting the blonde princess to nod enthusiastically. "We'll probably find out as the story progresses, but if that's too long for you we could check out his profile after we finish the chapter." "Okay." Naturally perplexed and intrigued, the blonde with whiskers gulped down the last of the noodles before getting up to investigate. Clock clock clock, "All right. All right. I'm coming," said Naruto in frustration when the knocking continued. He was about to express his annoyance more when he pulled the door wide, but he stopped dead at what he saw. Enko, Ibiki, and the girl from the hot spring stood in front of him. She was grimacing and massaging her neck with one hand while holding her wand tightly in the other. The hitayate around her noggin, which resembled the other three's, was a new addition. It was a blue headband with a metal plate on the front that had a stylized leaf engraved on it. The redhead with the demonic appearance grinned as she sipped her new beverage as Marco said, "So that headband is a form of identification, good guess there Hekapu. But what's wrong with her neck?" Hekapu shrugged and added, Probably an insurance policy to make sure she doesn't try to run out on her debt. Ibiki said, Naruto Uzumaki, but it sounded more like a declaration. Before the menacing guy gave him a scroll that was closed and had a crimson binding in the center with the bold kanji for C rank in the middle, Naruto remarked, yeah, that's me. Naruto looked at Ibiki blankly as he added, by order of the third Hokage, you are to house and care for 1-star butterfly until the time she finishes working off her debt to Konoha as a probationary genin alongside Team 7. Kelly and Tom moaned in awareness as Marco sighed, I knew it, indentured servitude. Indent what now? Star questioned bewilderedly. In layman's terms, you're a servant that works for free until you work off the debt that you owe. Hekapo clarified bluntly, and Star responded with an understanding, oh. The problem is that while it's a normally fair system to deal with debt, more than a few people have manipulated it into basically enslaving people forever. And given the power you can wield with that wand. If the paleness of her face was any indication, Star understood the evil woman's idea clearly before she trailed off. Say what now? Anko shoved Star into Naruto, sending both of them to the ground, and stated, in layman's terms, boy Gaki, your girl Gaki's babysitter for the foreseeable future while she does her community service. Ha 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 ha. Marco questioned, what's so funny H-Poo, as the scissor maker started to giggle. Her smile turned to a Cheshire one as she replied, oh nothing, just imaging Moon's reaction if she found out that her little girl was gonna be living with a boy without any adult supervision. She laughed even more when the other members of the group went red at what she was suggesting. Before disappearing in a whirl of leaves, the stoic man said frankly, the full details are in the scroll, if you still have questions then consult Hokage-sama. She turned to walk, but she stopped in the middle of her stride as if she remembered something. I late for a date with some dango so, yeah, what he said. She retrieved a tiny brown bag from her pocket and threw it across the still-down blondes, saying, oh wait, almost forgot. Make sure you use those, wouldn't want any more little gakis running around too soon. Bwahaha. Oh my stump, I love that woman. Hekapu erupted in laughter and collapsed from her chair while Tom appeared ready to burn someone alive. Marco and Kelly were nearby, and Star's blush turned supernova at the suggestion. After saying this, the purplet erupted in laughing and slammed the door, leaving Naruto and Star alone as they untangled themselves gradually. Hello again, Star replied, smiling nervously as she hurried to her feet and extended her arm to Naruto. I'm Star, and I guess we're roommates now. In an attempt to shift the conversation, Marco said sarcastically, heh, déjà vu anyone, with a feeble laugh. Fortunately, it had some effect because Star chuckled quietly when he mentioned how she had moved in with him and his family and how he had eventually moved into the castle with her. To the princess's amazement, Naruto shook her hand and grinned, saying, looks like it, Naruto Uzumaki at your service to Bayo. Make yourself at home. He took that surprisingly well. Tom's eyebrows went up. Hekapu completed her mug without melting it and replaced it with a bucket of caramel popcorn, thinking, well, the book did say he was living alone with almost no visitors, maybe he's just happy to finally have some company. You're not upset that I'm being forced to live with you? Naruto shrugged as he hurried back to his dining table and finished his ramen, saying, shocked? Yeah. Upset? Not really, I'm sure Hokage Gigi has a good reason for doing this. Besides, he got me this apartment in the first place when I needed a place to live, so I don't mind sharing it with someone else if he wants me to. Though I am gonna give Gigi a piece of my mind later for not giving me a heads up. As she munched on her food, the evil woman remarked, "Meh, that's also a fair reason." Mooching a few morsels of caramelized buttery bliss, Kelly remarked, "It's really sweet of him, willing to share his home to a stranger like that." Tom laughed and continued, "Yeah, especially since said stranger blew him up not even a day ago." Star smiled awkwardly and giggled nervously. Star was happy that this boy was as kind of her as Marco's parents were when she initially moved in with him as an exchange student. "Oh, then thank you for having me." As she recalled the generosity Angie and Raphael had shown her both during and after her stay with them, Star exclaimed with joy, "They are very nice people." Her stomach growled loudly in protest of its emptiness, though, and her joy soon gave way to shame. "You wouldn't happen to have anything to eat, would you?" Naruto unrolled the scroll he had been given and pointed to the kitchenette, saying, "Over there in the cupboard, help yourself." Star began to cross the room and said, "Thanks," but she paused for a moment when she felt something squish beneath her foot. She noticed the package Anko had left behind and picked it up with interest as she looked down. Tom and Kelly shared Star's curiosity as she pondered out loud, I forgot about that, I wonder what's in it." Marco, meantime, had a very good notion of what was in that bag because the square indents on the paper with the circles in the middle indicated anything. His face was nearly melting from the redness. When Hekapu tried to chuckle, her mouth was full, and she was preoccupied with having a clone administer the Heimlich after she had inhaled some popcorn. But before she could open it, her stomach growled once again, so she quickly went to where the food was and put it down on a nearby table for later. Marco sighed, relieved that Star's counterpart hadn't embarrassed herself even more by opening the package. "Oh, thank God." God only knows that having to explain what a condom was to the rather unsuspecting princess was the last thing he needed. A few boxes of cereal, a few varieties of canned soups, fruits, and vegetables, as well as multiple styrofoam cups similar to the one she had seen Naruto eating from, were waiting for her as she opened the cabinet. Question marks appeared on her face as she picked one up and questioned, "What are these?" With a disbelieving expression, Naruto answered, Instant ramen duh, what else would it be?" Did this girl not understand the meaning of ramen? "What's ramen?" The air became immediately tense, and after a brief silence, Kelly remarked, "Am I the only one that feels like Star just stepped on an active landmine?" She looked intently at the TV and didn't see that everyone shook their heads in response. Star questioned, "What?" as Naruto gazed at her indifferently for a few moments. "Did I say something Roi-P?" The girl let out a shriek as Naruto abruptly lifted her into a bridal carry and leaped out the open window. As the blonde with the whiskers leaped from rooftop to rooftop, they were already a few blocks from Naruto's, and now her apartment by the time Star's brain finally processed what had just transpired. With the village going beneath her and the entire area glowing softly and homey from the lowering sun, Star was filled with amazement. As Naruto effortlessly leaped at least 80 feet in the air in a single jump, a feat she would need to replicate using her magic, she thought, "Wow, this is way farther than I can jump." When Hekapu finally got the popcorn out of her throat and coughed it up as a loogie that hit the floor with a gentle splat, she added, a little breathlessly, "Boy got some good legs on him." Tom claimed, "Meh, I could beat that." However, if you paid close enough, you could hear a hint of doubt in his voice. Kelly remarked, "I wouldn't be so sure, that looks like he's moving at a casual pace," noticing the minor nuance because she has previously fought agile opponents. "Makes me wonder how high he could go if he really tried." Marco sarcastically stated, "Yeah, cool, let's focus on that instead of the part where he just grabbed Star and jumped out of a window for no apparent reason." When he was entirely ignored, Marco rolled his eyes. However, their voyage ended abruptly as Naruto dashed into a food booth and dropped into the street, just as quickly as it had begun. As he placed Star on one of the stools, the old man inside was startled by his shout, "Tuchijiji! 2 bowls of miso ramen stat. We have a code 0. The elderly man, who Star presumed to be Tuchi, laughed heartily and hurriedly to start cooking, saying, "A code 0, huh? I'm on it. What's the name of the unlucky soul that's never had ramen before?" As a drop of sweat trickled down the back of his head, Tom remarked, "Wow, this Naruto guy must be some kinda ramen fanatic or something if he has a special code just for telling the stand manager that someone never had ramen before." Star waved happily and said, "Star Butterfly, it's nice to meet you, sir." Tucci remarked, "Nice to meet you as well, Butterfly-san. Name's Tucci, but everyone just calls me Gigi." He then gestured to a beautiful young woman with long brown hair who had entered the room with a bag of flour. "And that's my daughter Ayam." The girl put down the flour and approached the two, asking, "Hi Naruto, is this a new friend of yours?" After saying, "Sort of I am Nichin," Naruto briefly summarized the day's events and even showed them the scroll he had been given, which essentially said the same thing Ibiki had said with a few extra words. For example, he would receive 2,500 Rio, $250 every 2 weeks to assist pay for expenses like clothing and food. Tom stated to Star, who nodded in agreement with both remarks, "That makes sense since he does have to take care of you after all, though hopefully that isn't added into the debt you owe." The precise amount that Star needed to work off was also disclosed, which made both father and daughter grimace, and how she would accomplish this by accompanying his squad on missions. The final section described his responsibility to ensure she remained in Konoha unless on mission. Star continued to touch her neck carefully, even though it was a pretty needless task because a tracking seal had been tattooed to the back of her neck. Star shivered as her mind pictured a large version of the queen looming over a chibi version of herself. "Thank the stump mom isn't here, she'd freak at the idea that I'd gotten a tattoo." In relation to which, Ayam placed a wrapped ice pack around Star's shoulders and said, "Here, this should help a little." The princess sighed in relief as the cold froze her delicate skin. As she gave the brunette a grateful hug, Star remarked, "Thank you Ayam, that feels so much better." Tucci put the big bowls in front of the two blondes and stated, "Order up, 2 miso ramen, on the house for your first visit." "I like them," claimed Star, grinning. The compassionate and understanding tone with which the two spoke with her counterpart and Naruto also made her think of Marco's parents. As the scent reached her nostrils, Star drooled and murmured, "Oh, it looks delicious." She then tilted her head to look at the chopsticks she had been given. Looking at the set of chopsticks her other self was awkwardly holding, Star bent her head and questioned, why would someone eat with those? In order to avoid giving the princess a lengthy explanation, Marco told her in the simplest way possible, that's actually a bit of a historical debate, with some saying it's because they were more aesthetically pleasing than regular silverware, while others claim that it's because they are easier to make with limited materials and ended up catching on.